Okay, well, welcome back everyone. I am going to try my best not to rush through this video. My dog has been crying in the other room for like 30 minutes now. He's fine, he has everything he needs, he's just whiny and needy. So to try to avoid inducing his barking from the other room and disrupting the video, I'm gonna try to just power through this as quickly as I can while also still getting through all my points. This is gonna be not a reaction and review video, but a reflection and commentary video, which I haven't done before. I don't want to talk so much about my thoughts as a reader necessarily with these books, but more my thoughts from my own personal faith background and just some of the stigmas around the series that I want to debunk and I want to talk about. So that said though, I will put up some Goodreads reviews at some point in the near future. I think each of these books got 4 stars for me, so the overall series gets about 4 stars for me. Maybe it deserves a little bit higher now that I'm thinking about it, but I'll get into those details in actual Goodreads reviews, but that's not what this video is for. So yeah, you can expect that, but not here. So again, even though it's not a reaction and review video, I do want to provide a brief summary if you're not familiar. So His Dark Materials is a fantasy trilogy written by Philip Pullman, comprising of The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. You may also know The Golden Compass as Northern Lights. That was the original publication title that was changed to The Golden Compass for publication in North America. His Dark Materials follows young heroine Lyra Belacqua and later young hero Will Perry, and is essentially a modern retelling of Paradise Lost, exploring religious and moral themes through the lens of a coming-of-age fantasy. So just to talk a little bit about my background with this book. Again, I don't really have necessarily a strict outline for what this video is going to be. I just want to talk about my thoughts. So if you've been following me on any platform for any amount of time, or if you know me personally, you know that I am a practicing Christian. I grew up in a Christian household. I had a Christian education both in my high school years and in my college years. So I come from a Christian faith background, and as such, these books, this series, ever since I was young, the only thing I ever knew about them was these books are evil. They're anti-Christian, they hate religion, they hate Christians, and they're just full of dark, evil themes, and you shouldn't read them. So I have steered clear of this series for most of my life because that was the overarching idea behind them. This was all that I heard about them, and I was told as an avid reader and an avid reader of fantasy, I shouldn't read these. But that changed when I went to college. So like I said, I went to a Christian undergraduate university, and I want to say about halfway through my college career there, I was helping my campus pastor kind of pack up some boxes in his office because he was getting ready to move, and I saw that he owned a set of His Dark Materials, and I was a little bit surprised, and he asked me if I had read them, and I said, no, I've never, I heard I'm not supposed to, we kind of had a conversation about it, and he was shocked that I, of all people, had not read these books, and he said, they're excellent, you really should read them. And because he was moving and getting rid of things, he gave me his copies and said, one day you should read these, you go ahead and take them. So I've had them for years at this point, and that was kind of my first inkling of hey, maybe I should give these a chance. In the same vein, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, I felt like maybe it was going in the same vein as Harry Potter, where I also, heard growing up that those books are evil, they talk about witchcraft, they're anti-Christian, and then I read them and realized that wasn't the case, and it's one of my all-time favorite stories now. So I've wanted to give these a chance for years and years and years now. I just haven't ever had the opportunity or the time. And like I've said in previous videos, I just completed my graduate degree, so my master's degree in creative writing, and being in the writing for young readers pathway of that master's degree, the amount of times I heard His Dark Materials mentioned as source material or as a resource or as an example of children's fiction done well, I finally said, okay, once I have the time, once I've graduated, I need to sit down and read these books because I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like there's a gap in my education because of this, as someone who not only is a great lover of children's fiction and fantasy, but is someone with a literature and a writing degree. I feel like I gotta read them, so I finally did. So overall, again, I'm not really sure the exact direction this is gonna go, but I want to talk about some criticisms and some overarching ideas about these books that I think are a little misconstrued or a bit blown out of proportion. So I'm gonna go into those and then just kind of talk about my own personal reflections and feelings about this book, because I ended up really loving this series. I see where where the hesitation comes from, but I just want to unpack it because it's a conversation I'm a little nervous to start, but I also want to start it because I think these books are worth discussing. The first criticism to respond to: these books are about children summoning and using demons, or it encourages interacting with demons, or paints demons in a positive light. No, they don't. That's not at all what's happening here. And I recognize why that would be something that is so widely spread in the Christian community and what would make Christian readers hesitant to read these books. But to clarify, the spelling of the word demon in these books is this one. Right here, okay? We got this, and I'm going to read the definition to you so that I don't get it wrong. This is an ancient Greek belief, this is an ancient Greek word, a divinity or supernatural being of a nature between gods and humans, or an inner or attendant spirit or inspiring force. So, the idea behind demons in this book is that your spirit, the concept in this world, is that your spirit, your soul, lives outside of you in the form of an animal that continually changes shape until you reach maturity, where it then settles on one animal that represents your inner being. Which is such a cool concept. It's so neat. I love that idea. To me, it really read as, here's a really special familiar. That was the idea, that it is this animal companion that represents your spirit and is deeply spiritually connected to you, that it is this sacred bond you have between yourself, your own body, and your soul that lives as this companion. That's the concept that's happening. It's not about playing with demons. That's not what's happening. I know that's the pronunciation, but it is the ancient Greek idea of somebody's spirit. And furthermore, the way that this has been translated, and again, I'm going to read this directly from another source. I did some research going into this because I wanted to make sure I had some things correct. But from Britannica.org, the term demon is derived from the Greek word daemon, which means a supernatural being or spirit. Though it has been commonly associated with an evil or malevolent spirit, the term originally meant a spiritual being that influenced a person's character. And I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong about this, but from what I have studied in my pathways studying biblical concepts and studying, ancient Greek, this word wasn't always malevolent. It is a Greek word meaning spirit, which we have then translated into English as demons, which has this negative connotation, but that's not what the original word necessarily meant in every context. So that's just the first criticism that I want to respond to, because when I opened the first pages and realized what was going on, I was like, oh, I think we misunderstood some things in our critique of these books without actually having read them. This was a concept that I heard constantly addressed when talking about why I shouldn't read these books or why Christian children shouldn't read these books, is because of this, connection with demons. Yeah, that's the word, but that's not what it means, and that's not what's actually happening. So that's just the first thing that I think has maybe been a little misconstrued or blown out of proportion, and also I think the concept itself is so neat. I love the idea of a little animal companion that is representative of your soul. It's a very special, beautiful picture that is represented in all the books. Those books are anti-Christian, is the second criticism I want to respond to. I don't think that is the case. I think this is one topic that deserves a little more complexity in the discussion of it, because there are definitely some religious themes in here that might rub you the wrong way if you are a Christian reader, and that's completely fair, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit, but saying the books are anti-Christian I don't think is fair, because what I read these books as, these books are anti-religious dogmatism. But the critiques that it was making, predominantly not even of the beliefs, but of the church itself, and it's a fictional church that is this kind of corrupted, misconstrued version of what the church is supposed to be. This idea that it is opposing and critiquing the way that the church has abused its power in the past, or used God's name to perpetrate its abuse and its oppressiveness in the past. So I don't think the books are anti-Christian. I think they are not even anti-organized religion, but critiquing the way organized religion has been used as an institution historically to be abusive or to use their powers to oppress or to conquer or etc. Fill in the blank. And considering this idea, I think that's something that a lot of modern Christians also critique. It's a conversation I hear more and more often now, of talking about what the church is supposed to be and the way it has failed in the past. And coming from a place of love for the church as a Christian, but being able to critique and recognize historically how much it has hurt people. And that is the perspective that I see this book coming from, is it presents this, again, fantasy religion that isn't real, talking about the way that organized religion or institutionalized religion can be harmful and dogmatic, and the way that it becomes abusive and oppressive. So again, that piece deserves a little bit more complexity in its discussion, but I don't think these books are inherently anti-Christian, or that's not what I understood the text to be saying. As I was researching this, another neat source that I found this is just from Wikipedia, but most notably, it says Pullman, the author, found some support from Christian voices, notably Rowan Williams, who is the former Archbishop of Canterbury, the spiritual head of the Anglican Communion. That's a big deal. Who, continuing to quote here, who argued that Pullman's attacks focus on the constraints and dangers of dogmatism and the use of religion to oppress, not on Christianity itself. So even the head of the Anglican Church was like, hey, I don't think this is the case. And from what I understand, Pullman and Williams were able to sit down and have conversations about this, and Rowan Williams was really excited that these books were being taught in schools because it's opening up complex religious conversations. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later too. But yeah, the idea that these books are anti-Christian, that's not the case. Do I think there are some pretty highbrow, difficult religious concepts to wrestle with here that maybe shouldn't be for younger audiences? Yes, that might be a little bit harder to pick apart. However, the idea that just inherently that these books are, fundamentally aimed at hating on Christians and critiquing the church. Not hating Christianity, but critiquing the church, yes. And it's not necessarily undeserved critique, if I may be honest, and if I am reading into this correctly. And I think there are some really, like I was saying, just neat conversations to be had about what's being discussed here. I saw one source put it as that it's anti-clerical. And again, I try to speak from a place where I love the church, okay? I am Christian. I also recognize that the church has been a harmful influence and a harmful institution in the past. And it's a conversation, again, that I have had with many other Christians that I'm hearing talked about more openly more and more nowadays. And so this conversation isn't even outside of the Christian community. It's something that's happening within the Christian community and talking about what church is supposed to be. So I think because we shut it down immediately as those books are anti-Christian, we miss out on some really neat religious and moral discussions that are happening within these books because of that. And again, just the idea that it's set in a fantasy world. Yes, it mirrors our world pretty closely, but it is still a fantasy world and it is a fantasy religion. It is playing with these concepts. It is not out here trying to attack the Christian church as it exists today. Again, as far as I understand it. And finally, these books are about killing God. Yes and no. Again, this is essentially Pullman's response to Paradise Lost, and so this God that's present is kind of an inverse of the God in Paradise Lost. Again, we are playing a lot with literary illusion and playing with a concept. So it's not that, I don't think Pullman himself has said, yes, I want to kill God. I don't think that's what's happening, and I don't think that's what these books are trying to do. And again, mild spoilers here, but did we miss in book 3 where when we talk about killing God in the book, they're trying to kill a figure called the Authority, who they have named as a usurper and who they believe is not actually the creator? That was a big thing that happened, but again, it is so just shoved down into this idea of, no, those books are about killing God. So yes, but also no, and it shouldn't, I think, be taken in a threatening way or in this, hateful towards God kind of way. And this is not the only piece of media that has done that. In Supernatural, this is something that is discussed and that I think maybe happens. I never finished Supernatural. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have seen discussions about that being a plot line within the show, but that's not criticized. And I know a lot of Christians who watch that show. I also think about Brandon Sanderson's works, which are not about killing our God, but the idea of the death of deities is very present in a lot of his works, but his works aren't critiqued for that either. Probably because, they're not set in a more modern world that so clearly mirrors and mimics our own, but still, this is not a new concept in fantasy. It is an idea that is played with a lot, and again, because I think of the time that this was published and the themes that are present, and because his fictional world so closely matches our own, it receives a lot more critique than these other fantasy mediums do. And I can understand why that would happen, but at the same time, it just feels like this knee-jerk reaction of, because it talks about this concept at all, it inherently is detrimental and evil to read, and I don't think that's, again, what he's trying to do or what's happening here. So I may have greatly misconstrued all these points, I may have greatly misunderstood them, but from my perspective, coming from a Christian background, having studied a lot of biblical sources, not throwing this out here as being a, I have credentials, because I don't, and I definitely still have a lot to learn, but I have a biblical studies minor as well as my major in English literature, so I studied these side by side. I studied literary analysis and I studied biblical analysis at the same time together, and what has been produced in these books is something that is so incredibly smart and worth talking about, but I think we hold it at arm's length out of fear that these are concepts we shouldn't be reading or we shouldn't be enjoying or we shouldn't look at with more nuance and complexity. So yeah, it's disappointing getting to these books and having those critiques and those fears in the back of my mind that I've heard my entire life, and knowing that's not even half the conversation that's happening here. It's barely even scratching the surface, and these are very surface level interpretations of what's actually happening in these books. My final note that I wrote here was, it's not like Pullman's out here saying we should kill God, but rather, hey, It's important to think for yourself and to question oppressive authorities that don't act morally. And hey, creation itself is very complex and lovely and neat. Those are the themes that I noticed, not, hey, God is evil and we should kill him. Again, I don't want to ruffle any feathers because I also understand that some of these are very valid concerns with reading, and I will talk about this in a second, but the idea of younger children reading this, or elementary age children reading this, I don't necessarily encourage, or I don't think these concepts are something they can grasp, and it would maybe plant some harmful ideas in their head, especially if you are raising them to be Christian, or you come from a Christian family. But that being said, older kids, yeah, I think these are cool books, and there's a lot to unpack within them. Let me just move on to some of the other points before I just start rambling about what I'm actually trying to say, my actual impressions of this. Like I said, this series was just a smart, clever, poignant coming-of-age fantasy that stuck with me and hit me a lot harder than I was expecting it to. Like I said, I will give my actual reviews and ratings on Goodreads, and like I said, I only gave these books 4 stars initially, and I still maybe stand by that. I don't know. I'm waffling on that a little bit. But, you know, I put these books down and was like, wow, those were awesome. Those were so well done. Maybe not my new favorites of all time, but I really appreciate what they're doing. This was really impressive. And it's been a couple weeks now since I finished these, and I can't stop thinking about them, and I'm researching about them, and I'm watching the adaptation. So this stuck with me a lot longer than I was expecting to, and is kind of like taken root in my heart as being something very special that I have read. So, and again, just maybe I'm just a sucker for coming of age stories, but the way it's done is just so beautiful and heartbreaking and honest, and it's such a lovely look at what growing up is in, you know, the context of this fantasy world, this fantasy realm, and these fantastical ideas. It's so beautifully done, and I wish we had more conversations about it in a positive light. Literarily speaking, it is just genius. The illusions that are happening here, again, his response to Paradise Lost, I want to go back, like I always say, with a highlighter and tabs and just go through and look at these. I want to go back and read Paradise Lost again because I read that back in college and it's been a while now, but I want to go look at those parallels and see the way that he's inverting these things and responding to it, because I thought it was so cool, and just those little tidbits that you notice, those little Easter eggs of what he's doing, it's just so clever. I don't know, that's the word that keeps coming to my brain. And again, it's an answer to Paradise Lost for teenagers, specifically said for teenagers. Again, I don't necessarily think it's good for children. There were parts of this that were really grisly that even I was like, ooh, I can't imagine reading that as an 8 or 9-year-old. I think that would really disturb me. But at the same time, I think a lot of, and this is a discussion that I've had semi-recently, that a lot of children's fiction doesn't seem very child-friendly, but children gravitate towards it and are like, yeah, this is cool. And there is something to be said about protecting a child's mind from something that's too much for them, and things that we notice the weight of as adults that maybe go over children's heads. So there are some violent scenes in this book where I went, that's pretty gross and kind of a lot, where to some kids it might be like, cool, and others it might be, you know, nightmare inducing. So it's, you know, understanding your own child and who you're teaching and what their threshold for these things are. But again, Pullman's intention, I think, was for an older adolescent audience, if that makes sense. It's meant more for teenagers, for brains that are young and still in that coming of age stage of life, but that can handle some of these concepts and some of these darker themes a little bit better. Again, I think it should be labeled more as YA and geared more towards like upper middle school, high school readers. I think in that age category, these books aren't anything to really worry about. And I think this would be amazing to teach to teenagers. I love the idea, especially because I come from a very short background of teaching at a Christian school. Looking at theology next to literary analysis and combining the both of them into the study of these books would be so cool. There would be so many neat conversations that would happen from that. These books combine so many different elements. They go into religious themes. They talk about literary illusions. They go into philosophy, into theology, into scientific theory, and it combines all of these elements into this epic story. So being able to unpack those alongside teenagers who are learning to notice these patterns, I think would just be so cool. I think it should be taught in schools. And I appreciate knowing that, at least in the UK, from what I understand, that it is, because it deserves to be. And again, I see the hesitation. I see where these critiques have come from. Like I've said previously in this video, it does require a more nuanced reading. And so the audience that you give it to has to be, you know, specifically prepared for what they are about to encounter, especially if you're coming from a Christian background. And there are definitely some themes and some ideas in here that are a little bit difficult to read as a Christian. But again, I don't think it's any different from reading any other piece of fiction as a Christian that isn't necessarily Christian. And I think the reason it gets so hard hit is because he is playing so much with religious themes here. Anyway, moving on. However, like I was saying, I think it is unfair and shallow to label these as anti-Christian and evil books. books. There's a reason why Pullman's name is mentioned along with the likes of J.K. Rowling and C.S. Lewis and Ursula K. Le Guin. There's a reason these books are heralded as children's classics. Like I said, there's something special about them, and they deserve a more nuanced conversation than what they receive from the Christian community, in my personal opinion. And that being said, there are some very Christian themes within these books. The idea of sacrificing your own desires for the love of another. The idea of doing the right thing even when it is difficult, of putting others before yourself even if you know it's going to hurt you. Seeking truth through opposition, standing up to oppressors, seeking justice. These are all very Christian themes that are happening in these books. And I don't want to be that person who, you know, is trying to force a Christian perspective into everything I read, but that stood out to me so clearly that in playing with those religious themes and in critiquing the church in the way that he was doing, through a fictional lens, again, he was also presenting some very Christian ideas that were not in conflict with that, but you had to hold them in tension together. This church that was clearly corrupt and that was using its power to oppress people, and the people fighting back, questioning their authority because they knew it was morally wrong, because they were coming from a more morally right standing. It yields so many interesting conversation topics and so many interesting ideas that need to be unpacked and deserve to be unpacked. And even though I'm saying I don't want to just Christianize it, if you are a Christian reader and you hold to the idea that you can see God's truths in everything, no matter what, then you will be able to notice these very clearly within the book itself. And it shouldn't be, in my opinion, and again, I feel like I'm maybe asking for an argument here, but I don't think you should be threatened by these books. I don't think you have to feel threatened by these books. I don't think that's what they're doing or what their intention was. And in speaking on the Christian themes, again, I want to go back already, like I say always, with like a highlighter and sticky notes and a pen and take notes, because there's so many quotes I wish I could have highlighted from the last two books in particular, where I was just floored by the concepts that were being presented and by the way morality was being presented. Some of the things these kids say about doing the right thing and trying to seek truth and loving others above yourself, I was astounded. I had to stop and go, wow, that was really profound. I should take a note of that. And then I kept reading and I didn't. But I wish I had, because there were so many moments that to me were so poignant and profound and well spoken, that speak to the morality of these books, into the moral compass that's actually guiding this story and found in these pages. And also, I think people maybe hackles raise a little bit with this because it talks so much about questioning authority and being okay with doubting and wrestling with your faith in that way and asking those kinds of questions. And I think Christians should have doubts and questions. I had a wonderful teacher once who taught my worldview classes who told me, and not just me, he told our class that if you never struggle with doubt, if you never ask questions, if you never have to wrestle with your faith in some way, he doubts you're actually a practicing Christian, because you're not engaging in that sense. You become kind of like the magisterium in these books. You just kind of become this person who does it for the sake of your title without questioning at all if what you're doing is right. If you don't have questions, there is some doubt as to whether or not you're actually engaging with your faith and with your beliefs and your belief system. So this idea that questioning the authority is bad, or questioning the church is bad, or having those questions or doubts in general is bad, I don't think is the right concept we should be taking away from it. I think it's actually good to encourage those sort of things. I love the idea of scholastic sanctuary, the idea of being able to ask questions and to study them from an academic standpoint and trying to understand and seek truth is protected. That's a very neat concept and something that I think we practice anyway as Christians, but we don't necessarily have that same name for it. And so we get kind of this icky feeling of, ooh, I don't like how much we encourage the questioning of authority and a questioning church, when that's something that we do also in our own faith. Again, I don't think these books are meant to be perceived as an attack on Christianity. That's not what I took away from them. And this is not to say, not to be careful about what you consume and the things you question. I think there is something true as going too far with it. I've had this conversation with my husband a lot lately, the idea of deconstructing faith, but not reconstructing afterwards, that so many people walk away from it because once they kind of pick apart those questions and come up with no new answers, they just decide that it's false and not for them. And so there's this tragedy in, not being able to reconstruct after the fact. But at the same time, again, you hold those things in balance, right? You walk into what you read, into the media you consume with your own Christian viewpoint, and you have to be able to parse through those ideas and not be immediately threatened by something that opposes your faith or that is different from what you believe. You have to be able to engage with those things and ask questions about them and recognize where you stand in your faith and how you're going to respond to it and what truth you can take away from that if there are any truths to be had. And from what I have read, His Dark Materials as a series holds so many good truths within them, even though they have these darker religious themes present. And again, like I said, while it is certainly darker and the religious themes are a little bit more complex, I think these books kind of get the same treatment that other fantasy series or fantasy concepts in the past have gotten. So these were published around the same time as Harry Potter. And like I mentioned earlier, Harry Potter got so much flack for being about witchcraft. Now a ton of Christians read it and have written papers and books about how many Christian themes are in Harry Potter and how that's a blanket statement and not necessarily true. It was the same thing, you know, in the 80s with Dungeons and Dragons of, oh, those are satanic, that game is satanic. And it's not. That's not what's happening. So I think this series has gotten kind of the same blanket statement of, oh, because it has X involved, it's inherently evil and bad and Christians shouldn't, you know, touch it with a 10-foot pole. And that's not what's happening here. Again, we have to be able to look at these things with more nuance and complexity and from a more secure place in our faith, right? It deserves an actual examination rather than just assumptions based on the word demon being involved in the story at all and the fact that there is a corrupt church institution in these books that is kind of the acting antagonist of the entire thing. That's where I fall. That I'm so impressed by these. I'm disappointed that these conversations aren't had more often. And if you come from the same background as me, the same camp as me, I encourage you to try to read these, give these a try. It might not be your cup of tea, and that's fine. I thought they were wonderful and brilliant, and I'm already ready to go try to write a paper about the nature of sacrifice and morality and the heartbreak of coming of age stories within these contexts. There's so many things I want to talk about within these books because they really are something special and have so much richness to them that deserves a different look than what we have given it in the past. Yeah, that was my impression of these books, is that I think the Christian community in general has maybe been a little unfair with the way that they have talked about them and made some assumptions that I think are not necessarily founded. I see where they come from. I do think that they're a little blown out of proportion. All this to say that if you come from the same camp as me, I encourage you and challenge you to give these stories a try and try to look for those nuggets of like beautiful truth within them, because they are such lovely stories and they're so beautifully done and they are so hard-hitting in surprising ways, and there are so many concepts in them that are worth discussing. So come to it with an open mind. You don't have to feel, I believe, you don't have to feel threatened in your faith background by approaching these stories and just seeing what they have to offer and parsing out those little nuggets of truth and those really neat moral conversations that come out of them. So yeah, those are my thoughts. If you have read these or if you've not read these, I don't know, either way, if you want to have a conversation about these books with me, I am dying to have conversations with somebody about these books because I thought they were wonderful and I don't actually know many people who have read them. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Feel free to start a conversation if you want to. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. I don't know what comes next for me this month with video making. It really might be... Oh, I lied. I have a readathon coming up. That's next weekend. Oh my gosh, that's next weekend already. Ooh, I gotta prepare for that. Anyway, that's what you can expect from me coming up. Not a ton going on this month. I'm still kind of getting my footing with my writing. A lot of things have changed scheduling-wise because of the puppy. So it's kind of a miracle today that I even got to do this. So I always appreciate you guys watching this. I know this video is a little bit different, maybe a little too specific to reach a wider audience, but it's the video I wanted to make about these books with the background that I have come from before reading them. So as I said in a previous video that I would show you the puppy who is wandering around the office right now. He's out of his crate. So to say goodbye, come here. Meet Samwise. He is my favorite little friend right now, even though oh, thank you. Even though he's being kind of a brat. Anyway, this is all just to say thank you so much for being here. If you feel so inclined, you can follow me also on Goodreads and Instagram. They are linked below. If you'd like to see more of me and this little guy, you can also subscribe below. In the meantime, happy reading, happy writing, and we, together, will see you soon. Huh. Can you say goodbye? You give camera a kiss? Go smooch? Okay, that's all. Goodbye. Goodbye.